Welcome to the Church of Christ Women Authors blog. Today, I'm speaking with author Sarah Floyd. She writes inspirational fiction and poetry, and today we'll be discussing her book, Finding Joy. So welcome, Sarah. I'm glad you've stopped by.
Thank you.
Could you tell us a little bit about your novel, Finding Joy?
Finding Joy is a fiction book. It's set in Vermont in the year 2012, and it's got some romance in it, but that's not the only focus of the novel. There's also a big portion of it that's about the character of Joy as she's looking to find herself, to decide what kind of person she wants to be.
Okay, so what age group would you say your novel fits into best? Is there a particular age, or is it just pretty welcoming to everybody who picks it up?
I think that it's probably a little bit more geared towards younger adults, but it's not a standard young adult fiction book. The main characters are in their mid-20s, but there's also some middle-aged characters as well. I think it would probably be most appealing toward younger people, but I have had several readers that were older that enjoyed it as well.
Okay, that sounds cool. I always like to know because we have so many different people that like to read.
Yeah.
And, help them find the book that's perfect for them. So you were talking about your character, Joy. Is there anything particular about Joy you want to share with us? Is she one of your favorite characters? Do you have a favorite character in your book?
The character of Joy is a little bit like me. She has some of the same thoughts and concerns that I have had personally in my life, but she is also very unlike me in many ways. She comes from a very wealthy background, but she chooses in the book to reassess her past and her background and build a life for herself by her own standards and values instead. I think my favorite character, though, is actually her aunt, the character of Joanne, and the reason that that's true is because when I created the character of Joanne, I took a lot of traits that I really respect and admire from several different people that I have known in my life and tried to put all of those things together to make somebody who seemed very wise and comforting and worthy of admiration to serve as a mentor for the main character, Joy.
I think that's pretty cool. I was just thinking when you were telling me about how the main character is not your favorite character. I've spoken with, I think, 3 or 4 different authors recently, and it's funny to me because I'm finding this in my own writing too. Our main character that we want everybody to love often is not our favorite.
Yes.
I thought that was the funniest thing because I myself, when something I'm writing, I'm really falling in love with a secondary character. But I see from speaking to you and others that seems to be common. I think it's really cool how you made a composite character with different things or different traits that you admire.
I didn't want to make any one character exactly like somebody that I had known because, first of all, it's very unusual to actually know somebody well enough to create a character that lives for 200 or 300 pages that is identical to that person. But if by some chance you're successful, then it makes it really awkward when that person reads the book, and I just don't think it's probably the best idea. So instead, I tried to combine several things, and it's possible somebody might read my book and say, that seems a little bit like me, but probably not because most people don't look for themselves when they read a book. So I'm hoping that I can create characters that people can identify with without actually being identical to anybody.
That's really a good idea. It always makes me laugh when people read something and they say, "Oh, well, this is me," or "This is the author," and "This is, them exactly." And you're like, "No, that's not it."
Yes, it's very strange. Actually, when I started writing this book, I did not live in Vermont yet, where I live now. I lived in Tennessee, and I did move to New England while I was writing the book, but the book was almost finished at that point. And as soon as it was published, I had several people asking me, "Oh, is this your life? This book about you? Is this book about us? Because, we live in Vermont and we know you." And I just thought, did you read this or not? Because it's funny.
Yeah, I get that too sometimes. I've written something that's a little bit outlandish or out there, and then the very next comment I get is, "Oh, well, I know that's about you," and I'm looking at it going, "Do you really think that? Really?"
Exactly.
I don't think so. So I know that some authors dream about their characters, or maybe, sometimes it feels like ideas just seem to fall from the sky somewhere. Was there any particular catalyst for you writing this novel?
Well, one of the characters in the book, Paul, who's the main male character, one unusual thing about him is that he actually lives in the church building. And the church that I mostly talk about in the book meets in a house instead of a traditional church building. And because of some things that have happened in Paul's life, he serves as sort of a caretaker for the church, and he lives in the church building. And I think that actually that concept was what first made me think about writing this book many years ago, because I went to a small congregation one time that met in a house, and there was a young man that was the caretaker for that church because he had become unemployed or something like that, and so they let him live there, and he kept up the church building. So I experienced that somewhere around a year and a half before I actually started writing the book, and of course it morphed into something completely different from there. But I think that was the very first little spark that led to me writing the book.
That's really cool. I wondered if people have done that kind of thing, where they've lived in the building and taken care of it. It's fascinating how that one little thing kind of morphed into this whole book for you.
Yes. And there was actually a very long time period where I did nothing with the book. I had the idea. I thought it might be interesting. A couple months later, I started to try to create a story out of it, to try to write it. I wrote 2 pages, and then my husband and I packed up everything that we owned and moved to South Korea for a year. And I intended to bring the notebook that I started that story in, but I didn't. And a year and a half later, I came across it again and started writing on it again, and it became the novel Finding Joy.
I had a writer friend tell me, your novel will be ready for you when you're ready for it. So maybe you needed that little bit of time to think, and because I'm sure even though you didn't have it in front of you, it crossed your mind on occasion.
Yes, every now and then, even though I wrote several other things in between, I would think, I wish I had brought that, because it was a really good idea, but oh well, it must be somewhere, back in the States. So it was still on my mind occasionally, but it was really strange for me to go back to that early idea like that. It was not something I expected to happen.
Do you see yourself revisiting any of these characters or character concepts in the future, in any of your future writings?
Yes, I am trying to write a sequel, and I say trying because since I have a baby, and not just a baby, but a baby who still doesn't really sleep very much at night, it's really hard for me to find not only the time, but also the mindset to be creative. And I'm still kind of in the evaluating stage. I want to make sure that it really, truly is going to be a sequel, and not just my wanting to write more about these characters because I love them and I miss them.
I suspect if you love and miss them, your readers are probably loving and missing them too. So think about that when you're thinking about writing.
Have really wanted me to write a sequel, and I've got some decent work done on it, but I just am still in the questioning stage with it, and also considering doing a prequel instead. So I'm actually kind of writing on both of them simultaneously, but I don't know if anything's going to become of it yet.
Well, I guess time will tell,
yeah.
But I know people are interested in hearing about that, so glad you told us about that. Is there any particular message that you really wanted to get across to your readers in your book?
There's several that I really wanted to emphasize. I wanted to emphasize it's very important for a person to follow their own convictions and his or her own convictions, his or her own values in life. And I also wanted to emphasize the importance of communication, because something that's very significant in the book is the problems that came up for most of the characters because of a lack of communication or a cease in communication that they didn't necessarily invite on their own. And I've just really learned in my life so far that when people don't talk to each other, it can cause a lot of very unnecessary pain. And so those are a couple of themes. And then just, of course, I also wanted to emphasize the church and the wonderful benefits and connections that can be found in having a church home and in being a member of the church.
I think those are great messages, and I really do appreciate you working on the communication one. That's something that I have seen repeatedly throughout our years of working with different congregations. Communication is key, and to be able to express that to people in a way that is fictional. Sometimes it seems like when you read something that is a fictional work, you can, somehow or another, you seem to apply it better to your life. You pick up on those things, and that's really fantastic that you've done that. I know that you're indie published.
Yes.
Do you have any suggestions for other people who might be wanting to get their books out there?
As indie published books or traditional published books, or just any suggestions?
Whatever advice you have, either or both.
First of all, I would just suggest that if anybody wants to just try to publish something, I really do recommend CreateSpace, which is the route that I went with my book, because it's free. It really is truly free. You don't have to pay somebody a whole bunch of money to print your book, and it makes you feel really, really good about what you have accomplished, even before you've sold any. And I think that it's also a really good way to get feedback from people, because people are going to be more likely to buy an actual book that looks like a real book than they are to read some pile of pages that you hand them and say, hey, look, I wrote something, can you read it? As far as advice for, just writing a book, I can't emphasize enough that grammar and punctuation and spelling are important, which seems kind of sad, because whenever you study creative writing, people say, oh, you need to just write how you feel, you need to focus on what you're thinking and feeling, and of course that's true. And for most people, it's probably easiest to just rewrite initially. But I think your credibility just goes way down if you publish something that is full of errors. I say that probably there's several in my work, because I'm sure there are some that escaped my notice, of course, but it just doesn't seem like something worthwhile if it's got a bunch of typos in it.
Yes, and that is one thing, and I assume by the comment you just made that you do your self-editing.
I did. I edited it myself 5 times, and I should have had somebody else edit it, but there wasn't anybody that I really knew that could do it, and I didn't have the funds to hire a professional editor.
I think sometimes we put down people who do self-editing, and I know that I have done it, and I know I've missed things in some of my study books because I've gone back and seen it. But I was speaking with an author, his name's Peter David, last year, who has published extensively everything from comic books to Star Trek books to Powerpuff Girls, and he told me that he self-edits everything he does before it's published. He's his editor, and I think it can be done, but I think you're right. I've heard so many times, especially because I teach creative writing to high school students, and they want to just write it down, and they're like, no, we don't edit, and we don't do this. It's just how we feel. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to convey a message to someone, if you're going to share your work, sadly, there comes a time where you're going to have to learn that grammar, and you're going to have to cut, and you're going to have to revise. But I think that's great information to give people who are writing. And it'll be easier coming from you than their best friend next door.
This is true. No matter how good of an author someone is, whether you're talking about creatively or the mechanics of writing, no matter how good someone is, there are quirks that they have that's going to come through. Like, with me, I overuse the word just, and I overuse the word that terribly whenever I'm writing. And I saw something actually online a while ago that suggested that you go through and search for certain words and make sure they're not overused. So I was still editing my manuscript, and I can't remember how many times the word just was in my novel, which is less than 300 pages long. I think it was something ridiculous like 500 or 600 times. And so I went through and did, a search within my word processing program and started chopping that word out, those words out, and I think it improved it a lot.
That's actually really great advice. And you're right, we all have those particular writing things that we stick in there that we may not be realizing we're doing. Of course, we don't want to overuse any word because then our readers are going to make fun of us for it.
Exactly. My husband helped me with some of that because he did read what I wrote. It took him a long time because it's not his genre, but he did read it, and he said, well, they do a lot of sighing. They do a lot of speaking gently. And I went back through and once again did the searches, and I realized that there were definitely phrases or characteristics that were overused, and I think that that's probably one of the things that I do notice and criticize the most whenever I do read a book that somebody else has written. If there's too much of that and it's too repetitive, then yes, it does kind of make me want to mock that, and so I don't want to have that too much in my own writing.
Exactly. Anything we find fault with in other people's writings, we want to try to take out of our own.
Yes.
Because we're really finding fault with the grammar, and we're like, no, I don't like that. So that, and I think it's kind of interesting too. You'll write a paragraph, or at least I do. I'll write a paragraph, and then I don't know, one paragraph later, I find myself using the exact same word.
Yes, exactly.
And I'm looking at it, going, okay, delete, fix. I think maybe our minds work that way. At least mine does.
Maybe so. Maybe so.
So that search and find function on your word processing program is really a good idea.
It was very helpful.
Is there anything else that you wanted to share about finding joy that we may not have talked about?
I wanted to say I really appreciate everything that you are doing with all of this, with the blog and the Facebook page and everything, because I'm very passionate about there being access to not only Christian fiction, but Christian fiction that is unique to the church, and there's just so little of it in comparison to other fiction, and I think that's a shame, and it's been one of my goals or dreams or whatever since I was very young to write more of it, and I really appreciate your work to publicize those of us who are doing it. It's really a great idea.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It really started with a selfish motive on my part, which was I have all these books written and nobody's reading them.
Yes.
But then I was like, you know what, let me do a blog. So it was kind of purely selfish in some ways, but in some ways not. I wanted to help other people, and I honestly didn't realize how many authors there were that were women.
Yeah.
In the church. And that was another thing too. Just, I've been a preacher's wife for 20 years now, been doing all this stuff for a long time, but I don't see a lot of stuff from women, and I don't mean that in a way that, is kind of haughty or whatever, but we just don't see it.
I understand. Yes.
And so I was like, we got to do something about that. And my husband, he's like, my goal this year, he told me this last year, is to not in any unscriptural way, but empower women to realize, there are things that they can do, and they can do it, and they don't need to be beaten down, and there's stuff they can do, and let's do this. And I'm like, I love you. Yes, let's do this.
Yeah.
So, that was one of his goals. So I'm kind of glad that I got to do this too. So I wanted us to have a platform, ultimately.
That's really good. I really appreciate that. I'm a huge reader. I read all the time. I read any chance that I can get my hands on something worth reading. I have read maybe 5 to 10 fiction novels written by members of the Church of Christ, maybe. And I mean, I know there are more, but as far as just that I've had easy access to, maybe 5 or 10 at the most. And I've read, several thousand that were written by people from other religious backgrounds, and I think that's really sad.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too, is we want to help each other.
Yes.
You know, it's like she's my sister. I want her to succeed. I want her to do well. So how can I help you? There are some there, and we're finally learning who they are.
Yes.
Exciting.
This is something that I kind of a mindset that I kind of came up with in high school, but I want to be able to write in a way that will make people want to read it who are not necessarily only members of the church, but they'll read it, and within my book they will see the truth. Not saying that they're gonna, jump straight into the baptistry or whatever, but just like, that they will see biblical principles without planning on it. I can't really say it.
I know what you're saying. I understand that. And I think that's a lofty goal.
I don't want to preach at people. Not that there's anything wrong with doing that. We need people that preach at people or to people. But I want to write something that will be appealing to any person that's looking for a decent, clean read, and then I want them to be able to learn about the church sort of subtly through what I write. And that's been basically one of my main goals with my writing for more than 10 years is to do that. And so, I don't know if it will be successful, but I have had a few people read my book that were not members of the Church of Christ, and despite that, they still really enjoyed it and appreciated it. So maybe that's a start.
Well, it is. And really, there's no way of knowing what kind of impact you're having on the people who are picking up your books. I mean, you just can't know.
Yeah.
We're making those kind of impacts on people, and we just don't know it. People don't come up and tell us.
Yeah.
So think about that, because I'm sure you are making those kind of impacts on everyone who's reading your books, which is really awesome.
Well, I hope so. I've been so influenced by books in my life, and also by the examples of other people, like other good people, other Christians and everything. And so I really like the idea of being able to carry on that with other people if possible. You asked me earlier if I wanted to say anything else about my book. I wanted to go ahead and say something else about it, if that's okay.
Sure.
I think Finding Joy is really an important book for anybody who is wanting to learn how to be their own person. And I also think that it can help somebody who is struggling with that. And I would really like to make it available for anybody who is going through that, because that was in my mind as I was writing it. I also want to emphasize the fact that Finding Joy is not just a romance novel. It's not just like a cleaned up Christian version of a Harlequin romance novel. So if people are thinking, oh, I don't want to read just another romance novel, I mean, not that there's anything wrong with them, but some people are not really looking for that. So I want to emphasize that it's supposed to be more about the whole of Joy's life and experiences, because real life is not just romance or just a thriller or just one particular small genre. It's a combination of things. And so the category general fiction really does fit Finding Joy the best, because it has so many different themes and emotions in it.
Awesome. I'm glad you stated that, too, because you're right. Some people, might look at something and they're like, well, this is not really my genre. Maybe I won't read it. Being multi or general fiction, you've got a lot broader readership, but you're appealing to those people who might otherwise not have picked it up. So I'm really glad you mentioned that today. Thank you, Sarah, for talking with us today. I'm really glad that you shared some more information about Finding Joy, and that we got to know you a little bit better, and we got to understand a little bit about your writing, and thank you for your suggestions with writing. Basically, thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Thank you very much for having me in this interview and giving me the chance to talk more about Finding Joy.
I want to thank you again for listening today to the Church of Christ Women Authors blog interview with the author Sarah Floyd, author of Finding Joy. As always, I want to invite you to check out the blog at www.churchofchristwomenauthors.blogspot.com. If you have any questions, please contact me, Susan Elliott, at churchofchristwomenauthors@gmail.com. Thanks again, and have a great day.